Good evening, everyone. I'm Caron Kyriakou. I am the host of String Wag, and I warmly welcome you, despite the winter weather, to our third String Wag with my very, very special guest, Caron Chan. And before we start wagging officially, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land where we all are tonight. We are right around Australia. And pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that may be with us today, and acknowledge the important role that learning and music and culture has played on these lands over many, many thousands of years. So welcome to our third String Wag. I'm very proud of myself for creating a session where I get to chat with amazing string educators, the most inspiring ones of the business, and tonight's guest is absolutely no exception. Caron is dynamite. So far in the series, we've had Loretta Finn sharing top tips for beginners, and last term we had Stephen Chin sharing his approaches to accelerate students from intermediate to advanced levels. So today we welcome Caron. Caron is the Chief Strings Examiner for the AMEB in New South Wales, and for our international guests tonight, that's the Australian Music Examination Board, and has taught in tertiary and pre-tertiary programs at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music. She gives masterclasses throughout Australasia and is in demand as an adjudicator and presenter. Caron has co-convened the Australian Violin Pedagogy Conference numerous times and regularly presents professional development seminars for AUSTA and the Victorian Music Teachers Association. Caron was the syllabus consultant for Level 2 of the new AMEB Series 10 violin syllabus, and as a player she performs with Opera Australia Orchestra and has been a guest musician with the Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra, New Zealand Symphony Orchestra and Sydney Symphony Orchestra. She's participated in the Starling Delay Symposium on Violin Studies at the Juilliard School in New York and attended Mimi Zweig's seminar for violin and viola teachers at the Indiana University in Bloomington. Welcome to you, Caron.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So good to have you. So Caron's topic tonight, I get all my presenters to choose their topic, and tonight's topic is It Takes a Village, Building the Ideal Environment for Young Musicians with Community, Connection and Lots of Performances. And it's so wonderful to have you. And I love this topic so much because it puts music and connection at the heart of everything that we do. But there's some people I think that may not know you. I know you've got some of your good friends supporting you tonight, so that's great. But for those of us that don't know you especially well, maybe you can tell us a little bit about, a typical working week and what it is that you do.
Sure. So I teach 6 days a week, not full days. I would say my main focus is my private studio. I've run a private studio for many years, actually a couple of decades. And I'm also teaching at the Con High, also tutoring chamber music and their orchestra there. I also play with the Opera Australia Orchestra, so I often do quite long days of teaching and then finishing up performing at night. I also examine for the AMEB, as you mentioned before, and I think that's it.
That's probably heaps. I mean, your topic tonight, it's about community and about connection. And, we were chatting the other day and you were saying that largely you're mostly in the private studio. And I'm just wondering, how you would build connections in the private studio, because it's so much easier to do that, right, in a classroom and in ensembles. So I'd be really interested to hear about how you might do that, and maybe just briefly, because we'll get into it in more detail.
Yeah. Sure. I think when I first started teaching, I was just so focused on being the best violin teacher I could be. And I think I underestimated a little bit how important the social aspect of learning was. And my own sort of history with the violin was a bit like, I didn't do Suzuki and I didn't grow up with a lot of music in school or anything. So I hadn't been a product of those really amazing communal learning experiences. So later in life than I would like, I sort of thought, oh my God, I've got to really build community more within my own studio, because everybody knows when you teach privately, it can be a really individualistic pursuit. It can be really lonely. You don't have perhaps the amount of contact even with other teachers that you'd like. And with so much focus on just, creating the best little violinist I could, I just thought, oh, this isn't perhaps as healthy as it should be. And I just wanted them to really feel part of a community, and also, well, a small community, that's my studio, and then part of our broader community. So I started thinking I need to do more in regards to opening up the community to them.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to talk to you more, obviously, about your own teaching, because you're an extraordinary teacher, and also your own learning. But I know that you were lucky enough to learn from Alice Waten. And you know, I love to ask all of her students, what was it like to learn from Alice Waten? And, you know, sadly, she passed away last year, and she has left a legacy in Australia of some of the most extraordinary violinists, including, of course, Richard Tognetti and Sophie Rowell and Anne Horton and Robert Wilson and Marina Marsden and yourself. And I think you were telling me that Martin as well.
Yeah, and Dimity Hall, and
I mean, that's an extraordinary legacy. And she learnt from David Oistrakh, so she comes herself from an incredible teacher. What was it like learning from Alice, and how has her teaching informed your teaching?
Well, I have to start by saying I'm incredibly grateful to have learned from her. I definitely think if I hadn't learned from her, I wouldn't have been able to be a professional player. And certainly, I loved teaching before I started learning from Alice, but she was so supportive of any of her students who wanted to teach. And she taught us how to teach, which was such a clever thing to do. And the legacy of that is evident right throughout Australia.
It really is, isn't it? Like, it's an unusual phenomena what she's been able to achieve.
I think we should come through the Russian school, and pedagogy is a science over there. I mean, there were so many great pedagogues that came through the Moscow Con, that was part of her DNA as a violinist and as a teacher. And she was such an intelligent woman, and was smart enough to know that we shouldn't just be unleashed on unsuspecting beginner violinists with no training. So she really made it a part of our tertiary training to train us how to teach.
When someone asked, I think it was an interview in the Strad, and she was asked about what she looked for in a student, and her response was talent and aptitude, but also a dedication and an open mind.
I think she was very open-minded. She certainly, when I joined her studio, it was huge. Like, I think it got up to 40 students at one point, which at a tertiary level it's a ginormous studio. At that point, she also sort of put into place a sort of mentoring system, and she had some of her more senior students, like Sophie, giving like the second lesson of the week, and it was an excellent system. But one of the things I really noticed about her was that it wasn't like her way or the highway. She definitely had people who wanted to improvise a lot, or people who wanted to play in a bluegrass band, and she allowed for individuality as musicians in ways that some other teachers don't.
Yeah, what a gift to allow people, because we advocate, don't we, that music is self-expressive, and yet so often our students are not given the opportunity to ever self-express.
Yeah, that's right.
Down bow, up bow, out of tune, this phrasing, this bowing, this stance, this posture. That's amazing. Okay, so I know that part of the reason, I mean, your studio at the moment is nearly all or exclusively teenagers, and this is not by design. This is because your littlies grew up and they still are staying with you. and you love teaching teenagers.
I do. And I have two teenagers as well, so I'm sort of in the teen zone, but I think it's just an amazing time where they are full of passion, brutally honest, but I think, as we talked about the other day, I get to see the best side of my teenagers. And I think, like with all students, there are sides you can appeal to, and I think that teenagers get a lot of flack from society, certainly from their parents. So I think it's really important with teenagers to know to appeal to their best side from the moment you meet them. And if you speak to their best selves, that's what you'll get in return. So I do get a lot of the parents of my students, emailing me or calling me and saying, oh, so-and-so hasn't done their practice this week, or, oh, it's a disaster, or they're so disorganized. But then when they come to my house, I don't have all that baggage with them. I'm not having to parent them, thank goodness. So I can just keep my expectations really high, be really clear with them, set goals with them. And because dealing with teenagers is so much about autonomy and them being their own driver and playing by their own rules, I don't know, I'm really loving, I guess, finding out how each student works best and appealing to their best side.
That's another gift that you're then passing on, which is allowing them to have their voice. And what a great ally. Teens need allies, especially after the last few years and mental health situation as it has been. I've just started a PhD, as you know, like just at the very, 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 very beginning, and I'm exploring self-determination theory, which is about motivation, which we're going to get to in a little second. But the three components of this are connectivity, about how what you do relates to other people, the acquisition of skills and competence, and the third one, of course, is autonomy. And without that voice of autonomy, without having your own voice, you're not going to stick around. There is no motivation to continue. What do you find, like, how do you motivate those teens who are going through lots and lots of different changes?
Well, I try and find out what kind of lights their spark musically. Like, it might be chamber music, or it might be orchestra, or it might just be solo stuff, or they might not like all the classical repertoire. They might want to play, like, I've got a lovely student who plays contemporary and sort of not traditionally classical repertoire really, really well. And so I think the key is just to find, again, what lights their spark and then run with that. Because, again, it's not like working with preteens where it's a little bit more that you're steering the ship. It's so much more collaborative when you're working with teens, and it's got to be about what motivates them musically. And then also it's very much about social learning, which is kind of why I picked the topic, because I realized that teenagehood is the time when teenagers separate from their families and discover their own identity. So instead of just wanting to please mum and dad, which is very much the main motivator of preteens and little kids, family is way uncool, and they just want to be like their friends and do what their friends are doing. So you need to kind of get them into situations where they have friends in youth orchestra, friends in string quartets, so that again, that feels normal. Whereas when I grew up in New Zealand, it was a great place to grow up and a great childhood, but I was the only violinist in my primary school, which you can't imagine now. I can't imagine that in Australia now. Well, in inner city Sydney, which is where I'm obviously working, that's not heard of very often.
Yeah. So if there is a string program, there's lots of string players, and if there's not, zero or it's on. Okay. What about you? I mean, were you a good practicer? Did you do lots of practice?
Oh, I love practicing. I just love it. I'm such a mega violin nerd. I just love practicing. But actually, I would say I possibly, because I love practicing so much, possibly didn't learn efficient practice skills till late.
Oh, that's interesting, because you just like being on your own to play the violin. But were you goal orientated? Were you really looking to become better?
I'm a very goal oriented person, But I'll tell you a really funny experiment that one of my university teachers did on us, and Martin will probably recall this, is that I learned from an amazing Polish violinist when I was an undergrad in New Zealand, and he made his whole class he asked us to record our practice, and he said he would listen to it, which of course I'm sure he didn't even listen to a shred of it. But he said to us, don't practice more than half an hour a day, record it and send me all I think they might have been mini discs back then. And he said he was going to listen to it. I tell you, those times that I practiced and recorded my practice was probably the best practice I've ever done. Because I was thinking that Jan was going to listen to my practice, which of course I'm sure he never did. But if you have 5 hours to get it done, you probably won't be efficient. And if you have 30 minutes to get it done, you're probably suddenly the most efficient practicer on earth.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think
saying he did listen to my cassettes.
And they were cassettes, mini discs. That's hilarious. I think that just the sheer nature of being observed changes things anyway. So you're going to practice differently if you know someone's listening, right? So that's a really useful experiment, if only to show students that they can practice differently from how they already do.
Yeah, I think I was terrified and I thought, don't waste a note. So that was probably the best practice I ever did.
And well, what about your students then? So presumably you have students that were like me that didn't enjoy practicing, which is why I laughed when you said that you loved it. I loved all the things about playing music with other people. Yeah. And I didn't really I wasn't really able to take that joy and excitement back into the practice room. I did quite like noodling around on my violin. I did quite like that a lot, but I always got in trouble when I did it for wasting time, which was a shame. And I see my teacher's point of view, like, yes, you need to do both, not one or the other. Yeah. But how do you motivate students that presumably don't feel as motivated as you were?
I put them in concerts.
Aha.
I think it's so important to that students always have short-term and long-term goals, because, if you've got to stand up in public and perform, you're going to practice, especially if you're going to perform in front of your peers.
Yeah. And so what about the exam versus the competition experience? Do you kind of weigh them both equally, or do you think that playing for an audience is more holistic than perhaps an exam? I'm talking to a chief examiner here, so put me in my place as required. But what do you prioritize one or the other, or is that a parental choice?
No, I don't prioritize exams, and that is the funniest thing for a chief examiner to say. And people would probably be mortified to know that my students certainly don't do every exam, every A and B exam. And it's just, performing is about the exchange of human energy, and an exam isn't. And in New South Wales, where we have our exams, they're not really performance spaces. So I absolutely prioritize actual performing over exams. And that doesn't have to be in a very formal setting either. It can be, I love to organize different kinds of performances for my students. I think it's actually really important.
Is there a sweet spot about being performance ready? We don't want our students to be ready the day before a performance. We don't want them ready 4 years before the performance. Where's the sweet spot so that they're still fresh and motivated and conscious when they're playing? How early do they need to be ready before they perform?
I think you sort of have to build up the kinds of performances they do. So obviously even in lessons, I always say practice to perform, practice to perform. So what you're doing in your practice has got to have a positive impact on how you're going to perform. So just be careful not to take your practice out of context. And then they start performing to me. So I say, play through, don't stop, don't pull faces if you hear a mistake. So we're really coaching performance skills in the lesson.
Yeah.
The next sort of soft performance might be, one day I might get all my students to play to the next student. So I don't throw them in the deep end. You're in this competition in 3 weeks' time, because I think that's a recipe for disaster, and that's potentially going to be really bad for their confidence. So it's very stepped, if that makes sense. Getting kids
scaffolded, would that be? That's the word. Yeah. And so what I like about this idea of bringing that performance into the lesson is that it starts really safe.
Yeah.
And then you get that experience that we need, that playing on your own and playing for others feels differently. And we need to let students know, because sometimes we forget to tell them that it's going to feel differently when we play than when you go into an exam with just an examiner and the accompanist. Your body is going to feel differently. Yeah. And the more we get them used to that change, that's awesome. That's exactly what learning and good teaching should be. What about the parents? Do you have a situation where, like, the parents want, because maybe we have a thing with parents, don't we, is that we can't assume that they understand what it's like to go through the instrumental journey, but some maybe do know. And whether they try and impose an agenda at different times or a different pace or have different objectives.
They definitely do all of those things.
We'll
Um,
be really diplomatic about it because I think we've all taught, right? We've all taught in this context.
but
But
I'm also a musical parent, so I'm extra aware of what I'm saying. Um, I work really closely with my parents, but I sort of have well-oiled routines now about how I mean, I actually coach them alongside how I'm coaching the students. But one funny thing that I definitely notice is when I'm getting kids ready for really big competitions, I have a very strict kind of schedule with myself that the week before, I'm just like Mother Teresa. I won't say anything negative. I'm super, super nice. Any of the pushing, any of the, kind of really tough lessons, they happen more than a week before.
mm,
Because for me, that week of a big competition or performance is all about mindset because the work's already done. If you're, I mean, hopefully the work's already done. Ideally, the work's already done. But what I do notice about parents is that they don't understand the concept of tapering. They don't understand the concept of backing off and letting the kid do their own thing. And I can definitely feel the stress just ramping up with parents. Parents can say really awful things to their students sometimes, or their children sometimes in front of me, leading up to a competition. So I actually might send them an email or give them a call and just say, look, this is what I'm doing. So in this last week, we are focusing on being really positive, lots of mental visualization, and just so that the parents need to be on board. Because if the student's with me for two 90-minute lessons a week, but they're going home to mum and dad who are screaming at them, more practice, more of this, more of that, um, all of the good work that the student and I are doing can be undone at home because the home environment's got a much more powerful, well, not much more powerful, but it's, of course, they can't get away from it. And
yeah, and it comes loaded with a whole lot of other dynamics about the dishes and about the homework and
yeah,
about the maths score and all those other
yeah,
things that will happen.
yeah.
What do you do if have you ever pulled a student if they're not ready in time? Have you ever had to do that? No, because you would make
I,
sure that they're
I
ready.
wouldn't ever because
Mm,
I think that sends, well, a couple of things. It kind of sends them the wrong message.
mm.
And there are some students, it's funny, like it's good that you brought up because there are some students, just as there will always be kids who can't learn by being told. They need to learn by experiencing. You're
I think
that.
you're looking at one. Yeah.
So, I mean, and actually, by and large, my students are always ready on time. I just find a way to get it to happen. And I mean, public humiliation is a very good motivator to practice and be ready. But no, I have never, and I would never, because I think if that is what's going on, then if they learn by having the experience of, I mean, I never really want students to go through a bad experience, especially not in public like that. But if it happens, then it won't happen again.
It won't happen
And
again.
that's much more powerful than me saying, oh, you should have done your practice. I think actually you rob them of that learning
Mm,
opportunity if you pull them out. So no, I haven't.
mm.
I have never had to. So
Well, that's like amazing good food for thought, I suppose, of holistic approaches to less than realistic situations, right? So exams and competitions are not normal performances, I suppose. I suppose that you normalize them. But you mentioned something that I'm really interested to follow up there, which was visualizing. And
mm,
that's something that in any of the Carol Dweck kind of growth mindset
mm.
um, work, that visualizing is really important, like seeing yourself on the stage, seeing yourself in front of that. What are strategies do you give your students for that?
Um, we do practice it, and I think the thing is that when students start doing it, it is quite hard to do well. I say do it when you're comfortable, sit down or lie down on the bed, and then often you get people falling asleep, which is fine because it's sort of going into the subconscious. But to visualize a performance in detail really thoroughly is actually very hard because you have to concentrate so much and you're creating the sensations. But I sort of talk about, I mean, ideally before a really important performance, the student has been in that venue before, and often they have.
Mm,
Um, and so I'll say, visualize. what does the venue look like? How big is it? What color are the seats? I'll get them to shut their eyes in a lesson. I'm talking them through it. And then, what are you doing before you walk on? Because there'll be a stage door, or, they'll be sitting in the audience or backstage or something. And we would have already talked about a sort of pre-performance routine, which the kids can personalize themselves. We talk about breathing. We talk about the sort of final thought or mantra they might say to themselves before they walk on. And yeah, so
Wow, that's awesome teaching. Do you know, I wish that all of those skills were more commonly implemented, because I would suggest that they probably aren't enough.
yeah. Well, I think again, a visualization is so powerful. I mean, there is, I think, there's a really great violinist and violin teacher, Nathan Cole, who he's, I think, one of the LA Phil concert masters, and he's got like quite a lot of pedagogy things going on online. And one of his little posts recently was about a study of golfers who, I think they were divided into two groups, and they were trying to improve their golf swing. And one group, or maybe it was three groups, one group could only visualize their swing, one group could practice their swing, and the third group did half visualization and half practicing. And the group who improved the most was the visualization group.
Right.
Yeah. So if you do it well, it's so powerful.
And there's lots of opportunities to do it. You don't need a quiet space. You don't need a practice room. You don't need an accompanist. You don't need a good piano. You can do it on the bus.
That's right. And I kind of get my kids onto it late in the stage of preparing for things, because often at that time they're practicing a ton and I don't want them to get injury. So I said, instead of
Mm.
another run through of that concerto, sit down, lie down, shut your eyes, visualize. And it's just so powerful, but it doesn't make them any more tired. They can do it on the bus. Yeah, they
Mm.
can do it anywhere.
I mean, that's just such extraordinary skills. And like for young students to acquire early, like many of us have kind of stumbled upon this in later life. And again, I'm speaking for myself, stumbling upon the benefits of visualizing and pacing the right pace and all that kind of stuff. And I think that looking at the teachers coming through now, of just how much better they are at being holistic, and that there is less ego associated with teaching
Mm.
now, it feels, than perhaps there was.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of who we are culturally, though, as Australians and as New Zealanders. I mean, we live in a more egalitarian society, I hope, than a lot of other traditional centres of sort of pedagogical excellence. And certainly you can get results from that master and apprentice or master and student model, but that's not really the way, it doesn't really fit our culture, actually.
Mm,
So, yeah.
that makes
And I
sense.
yeah, and I think you can get, I mean, I heard a really funny interview on the radio with Vadim Rapin, who studied with Zakhar Bron. And he was in a class with Zakhar Bron at the same time as Maxim Vengerov and Vadim Gluzman. And the interviewer said to him, "Oh, how did Zakhar Bron get his amazing results?" And actually, it was Vadim Gluzman who was being interviewed, and he said, "Oh, mostly by screaming." And she said to him, "Oh, would you, if you had the chance to go through that again, would you go through it?" And he said, "No." Like he just absolutely wouldn't repeat it and wouldn't inflict that on his own students. So, I think it's like that sort of Hippocratic oath: first do no harm. Like
Mm.
you've got the chance to develop someone and imprint music on their lives, but don't leave any victims behind. Like you just can't hurt people in the process. It doesn't matter how badly you want them to be your next star or whatever.
Uh, in The Art of Violin, Yehudi Menuhin's book on the art of the violin, and one of the things that he was talking about in teaching there was do no harm. And I don't think I really at the time, because I read it 100 years ago, because I'm an old person, that I really fully appreciated the impact, because to me do no harm felt like a baseline statement, right? It's just like, well, that's. But then when I really started to think about some of my teachers and some of the things that were said, and I mean, my very first violin teacher was just gorgeous, and we were all in group lessons, and I loved it, loved it, loved it. And then for reasons unknown to myself, my father decided that he wanted to put me in private lessons without any discussion, and I lost all my community, and I just sort of just, it was then just me and private lesson. And this teacher was the hit you on the head with the bow if you made a mistake teacher. And of course, when you're 8, that I didn't respond well to that, and so that created an anxiety that I think I'd never had before. And I'm sure that there's millions of us with that story in its own way. It could be that you were yelled at, it could be that and it gets in the way of the music, which is why we're all there, right?
Yeah. It kind of taints what is such a positive thing. And it's also such a privilege to be able to be a part of any student's journey, be they 5 or 25. So we just can't take that for granted and can't let our own ego get in the way of, yeah.
Yeah, our students are not ourselves, and they're on their journey as well, and their motivation for learning, we may not even really know their motivation for learning and what happens behind the scenes, and etc. So yeah, okay, well, here's some other questions for you then. Let's go back to your topic about community and connections. Is there anything that you want to, I know we want to talk about teacher reflections as well, but what about anything else that on that topic that you want to talk about connecting and music being a connecting tool?
Oh, I think I think I'm coming at it from the perspective of having a studio full of quite intensely motivated young people, and I think I do more now than I used to try and make them much more aware of how they can be of service in the community and how music belongs everywhere in the community rather than just in the practice room and in the concert hall. And I think that's just such an antidote to what a lot of their focus is, because a lot of their focus is individualistic, solo performances, competitions, not so much exams, but yeah. So there is here in Sydney, there's a cancer centre, specialist cancer treatment centre called the Chris O'Brien Lifehouse. That's sort of opposite RPA Hospital. And I, pre-COVID, used to take groups of students from my studio to play in the foyer of the Lifehouse quite regularly. And the design of the Lifehouse is in sort of like an atrium that's a central column. And so my students will play, or anyone, there's a grand piano there that was donated, and they have a in-house choir, and they really focus on the arts as a sort of healing part of the holistic journey of cancer therapy. It's really wonderful. So I used to take my students there to perform, and then the music would travel up this atrium, and then I started getting emails, or the Chris O'Brien Lifehouse volunteer coordinator would email me and say, oh, someone was receiving radiotherapy treatment there, and emailed me and to say that just took their mind off it. And to take the kids there and have them perform there just blew their minds, because they were being genuinely appreciated for their music, not for coming first or second or third, or it was music in the community, music to heal and soothe. And I think that was really important for me to bring that element of things into my studio, because it is a very I don't know how to say it. It's a studio that's quite focused on high performance, I guess.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me that you've got those students and that dedication there. But let's go back to the hospital then, because what you've sort of done is that you've shown them context of how music can affect people in perhaps one of the most required ways of illness and pain and grief, which happens in hospitals. And then you have created, I mean, what you've done is community engagement, of course, and that's massively important. And it takes, in terms of motivation, then you've gone from that extrinsic, I'm playing because I want the A and I want this, and my friends have got book 17 and I want to do book 18 and whatever it is, but into themselves for the right reasons of it. It's bigger than me. It's about the music. It's connecting with people. It's bringing people together. And that's a magical experience for a teenager. That's a massively powerful thing.
Yeah, well, what kind of surprised me since then is that so many students have said, "When are we going back to the Lighthouse? Are we going to go to back to?" And they, it's something they definitely remember and something that they want to do again. So obviously, I was a bit worried, honestly, before I started doing it because I thought, "Oh, are they going to see sick people? And is this appropriate?" I mean, I did take some 9-year olds. I think 9 or 10 was the youngest, but I obviously chatted to the parents about it first. But I was definitely nervous about it beforehand, um, as you can be when you have the responsibility of a group of students. But it was a really positive experiment, and it's just that post COVID, everything's a little bit more difficult, and everyone's got to be well before they go and all of that sort of stuff. So I haven't done it as regularly as I was doing it before, but.
I mean, this kind of whole conversation has largely been about connections, but at the very, very start, you talked about how it's so easy as an instrumental or studio teacher to be isolated, that you are, especially if you're not in a school, right? So you're isolated from other teachers, and maybe competitions is where you might sort of see what other people's teaching is at. But, as an examiner, you would see the results of lots of people's teachings. And have you got kind of any sort of feelings about things that we need to do, teachers need to do to improve their practice?
Um, yeah, I think just making, well, firstly, like a commitment to lifelong learning. Because if we're in the position of educating other people, we have to believe in the growth mindset and constantly learning more and becoming better every day, every week. Um, I definitely, I think one of the things that I is a bit of a drawback of, it's not the system, it's not the Amy Be system, but it's how the system is used, is that people use it as their sole focus. So, say in a year of preparing for a grade 4 or 5 exam, a student might just play those pieces.
So they're
And
using it as a curriculum, not as the syllabus that
yeah,
it was
so
designed
that
for.
is the biggest
Yeah.
misapprehension about Amy B, and I'm forever trying to clear it up. And it's really hard because people say to me, you know, oh, they learnt Suzuki or they learnt Amy B. And I'm like, Amy B is not a teaching system. It's an examination syllabus. So you can be from any school of violin playing, prepare the right stuff and do an Amy B exam. That's the way it's designed. But to only use the books and to only use the grades is really limiting, potentially really limiting, if you're not supplementing it with a lot of other stuff. But
Yeah.
it was not ever designed to be a limiting thing.
And they would be the first to admit that as well, that it was not designed to be the core repertoire or the only, it's not nutritious enough.
That's right. But in praise of exams, what they do is, I think, because of the way the lists are organized, I think you get a diverse range of
Yeah.
repertoire. You play probably more repertoire by Australian composers than the students otherwise would if they weren't going through the books, because the
Yeah.
books have more and more Australian content than ever before. And that you have to have a number of pieces ready at the same time as all your scales and all of that stuff. Whereas I think in traditional sort of one-on-one teaching, most students are probably learning one piece at a time. And if you want to become a professional musician, it's really important to have a really large capacity to be across a lot of repertoire at any given time, right? So,
Yeah. And to be learning it faster as well. Like
absolutely.
I felt like, as in I was very AME bead.
Mm,
But I did enjoy the variety of the pieces, and I really started to learn what a list B piece was and the type of technique required for all the Baroque stuff, which is what it was. But then I secretly started to really like my list Ds, a bit more contemporary, a bit more fun. And so and that sort of, because they were categorized, I suppose I became a bit more aware of genre than if pieces were put on the stand and let's learn this one. But I feel like I'd almost learnt them all by heart before I'd learnt to read them properly, and that it wasn't enough material for me to learn to become a good fast, like the way that we would be now, of chomping through rep really quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
So those gaps are really obvious in those students, and I had to do a lot of homework, and I'm sure lots and lots of other AME bead kids would have had to have done lots and lots of homework to catch up on missed repertoire and the gaps, because there's heaps.
Right, but again, it's not a fault of the syllabus because it's not a teaching
That's right.
curriculum, as you say. So it's about how the syllabus is used.
Mm. So yeah, the balance of that. And then competitions, of course, they have their own criteria. So that's a nice way of actually bringing in bigger works, longer works, more interactive, I imagine, with the accompanists as well, like on more ensemble based playing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think one of the most valuable things that students learn through big competitions is just incredible capacity to be across so much repertoire and have it kind of simmering and then bringing things up to the boil just at the
Mm,
right time. If you prepare for National Youth Concerto Competition up in Queensland, you've got to have your whole concerto, which for a teenager is really huge.
massive, yeah.
But you've also got to have your recital program ready. So that is just great preparation for becoming a professional musician. Because if you're someone like Dale Baltrop or Sophie Rowell, you're not just learning one movement of a concerto. Like one week you've got a huge program with MSO, the next week you're off playing quartet. So you've got to, again, be able to churn through repertoire really quickly, be able to sit on top of a lot of repertoire at a high level and, bring things up from a simmer to a boil, just sort of not effortlessly, but it's got to be easy. And students have to have that capacity if they want to be professionals. So that's kind of what I use the bigger competitions for. That's part of their real value for me as a teacher is just building capacity and building
Mm.
resilience as well. My goodness, if you've got to, if you want to go into one of those big competitions, you want to be on that concerto for many, many months. And
You have
that's,
to know it. No,
yeah,
like innately. Yeah.
inside out. And it's kind of hard yakka, but really, really good training for life to just go deeper and deeper and deeper into that masterpiece.
Mm. And there's something about knowing a piece, it owns you and you own it. And there's something about it becomes you, and being able to play so confidently because you know the work, that the only nerves you need to worry about are the right ones.
Yeah, but I think also if you know a piece so well, like I mean, I I want all my students to get to the point with their repertoire where they can take risks in performance,
Mm.
which is why I get them to perform and perform and perform so that they are not going to take risks in the first performance, but by the seventh, they might. And I think the best performers, the ones who we really admire, you don't walk away from a Ray Chen concert saying, "Oh, that was so safe." You have the feeling that they're playing as if their life depends on it, and it's just being able to take risks in performance, which is something I do want my students to do, and I think we all should be aiming for that. It's only really possible if they've had those safe performances to begin with.
And enough performances to feel comfortable in the zone of performing.
That's right. So, one of the anecdotes I wanted to share was when I was at the Delay Symposium a long time ago. I went to a masterclass with a really prominent US teacher called Ani Kavafian, and someone asked her, "Ani, how many times do you think a student has to play a piece before they know it really well?" And she thought about it and she said 50. And I was, that was how long ago? Maybe 10 years ago or longer that I was there. And I was like, oh my God, 50. I was thinking, I never get my students to perform something 50 times. But I think one of the things that I'm really trying to get my students to understand is we don't perform things once or twice. We perform them many, many times. They get better and better and better. And then you'll come back and revisit that concerto for your whole life. And I also think about people like Leonidas Kavakos, who's, one of his sort of concertos for which he's famous is the Sibelius. And I read in the Strad that he's performed it like 350
Wow.
times. I mean, you have to keep reinventing yourself. You have to find new ways to look at the repertoire. But ultimately, I think our students don't quite realize how deep they can go into the music and how many layers there are and how that can only be really revealed with repeat performances.
Mm.
And yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I tutor a string quartet at the Conservatorium High School here, and they were playing the Haydn C major quartet first movement, and they had a little performance. And then the next week, I turned up wanting to work on that same movement and work on all the things that went a little bit wonky. And they were really cross with me because I hadn't brought a new piece. And so I had been coming to the rehearsal thinking, oh, we're definitely going to get it better. But they were like, we performed it once, we're done.
Yes.
So yeah, that's what I really want to get across to my students is, some of these great masterworks like Beethoven Sonata or some of the big concertos, you're going to be living with for decades, hopefully. And to really know a work well and to really have the freedom to take risks with it in performance, it has to be performed multiple times. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds to me, listening to you talk, and I might have missed that earlier on, your students have 2 lessons a week, or is that only as they come up to exam?
No, probably half of them do. A lot of them have 90-minute lessons. A lot of them can't have 2 lessons a week because of Sydney is big and everyone's busy
Yeah.
and people have got multiple children and life. In my dream world, they'd all have 2 lessons a week, but sometimes I make that work by having one live lesson and one Zoom lesson a week, and that works really well because you can do things like I can hear maybe the scales, arpeggios, double stops on Zoom, half an hour in the middle of the week. And then, I think if you really want to get progress with your students, 1 hour a week or half an hour a week it's not going to get you very far. And certainly top teachers around the world and top institutions for training young musicians don't work on the 1 lesson a week principle.
Yeah. So we are looking at a demographic of people then that are in a position to be able to afford that. And does that create, I always think about that with the music that we play and think about that with orchestras and music lessons. And, there is a divide there that it's not accessible to everybody. And that worries me.
Yeah, it worries me too. I wonder if, there could be you could buddy up with someone and have a group lesson. You could, I mean, it's a little bit different for me because you could do what Alice Waten did, which was to train some of her more senior students to give the second lesson a week, and that could be cheaper, but I can't quite do that because I've got teenagers, so I can't.
Yeah. And I'm not saying for one second that you shouldn't be doing what you're doing, by the way. We need to have teachers who are expert teachers of expert children that really want to be pursuing those things. But I am aware, that it does branch off, that some people can't compete with 2 lessons a week or even 1 lesson a week, or one 40-minute lesson a week might be the stretch.
Agreed.
So that's an interesting kind of thing. What Sheila Nelson used to do, you remember? I love Sheila Nelson and her little books. And she was working at the Tower Hamlet Project, which was a commissioned flats in the UK. And she started, it was sort of the beginning of the outreach string orchestra. And she would charge everybody just for a half-hour lesson, but only give them 25 minutes. And then take that 5 minutes from every single person and do big ensemble on the weekend. So the second lesson was already covered in the fees of, because the difference between 25 and 30, either way, it's not enough, right? So, but there's a lot of learning that can happen en masse in that ensemble. So that's how she did that. And it was a really good way, I thought, of, for those who are teaching in areas where there isn't, and also, with parents that perhaps this is their first generation of having children that are able to learn an instrument because it's safe. And so, so there's lots of ways of approaching. It's possible, isn't it, if we rethink ways of delivering?
I mean, there are lots of initiatives the ACO has an amazing initiative out at, I think it's St Mary's North Public School here in Sydney, and they have run a wonderful music program where I think, I wish I knew the details of it. I feel like students didn't take the instruments home, but played at school and had wonderful teachers picked by the ACO and ended up giving wonderful group performances. It's that sort of stuff. I don't work a lot in that kind of sphere, but I definitely think about that it is a realm of the privileged.
I work a lot in that sphere, but I see both sides and I want both things to be happening as well. So, and I'm very delighted to have expert teachers doing amazing things. But I want to talk about, because we've got a little bit of time, about back to teacher reflection. And you've prepared a sheet for everybody today. So Caron's given us this amazing handout, and can I bring it up? Can I share it? Let's go.
Yeah, so it's just 11 ways to enrich your instrumental teaching, and they're not in any particular order. So the first one that I wrote down is invest in and teach a wide variety of repertoire and studies. So again, I think all the teachers that I really admire, um, Alice definitely is included in this, have a huge music library and teach a really wide range of repertoire. This is super important because you're going to have students with different needs coming from different backgrounds, and again you want to pick the piece that really sets them on fire. So if you're only ever teaching the same repertoire, you're probably only going to be able to teach a kind of small slice of demographic. So that's really important, and it is an investment. I definitely, when I started teaching, kind of went through the AMEB manual list and just bought every piece and tried to teach as many of the pieces as I can, just to find out which ones I love the most. But part of being a really good teacher is to teach a really broad repertoire, both pieces and studies. The second one is to observe other teachers' lessons. So I think there's a lot of traditions of doing this in other countries, but not such a big tradition of this in Australia. But I'm sure you can just ring up any teacher you want to observe and ask them, and I'm sure they would all say yes. And Alice definitely had people coming in and observing her lessons, and I know that in the States, so many tertiary studios and probably private studios to have a really open door policy, um, of people observing and sitting in on lessons.
I mean, for a classroom teacher, that's an essential part of your training, and you can't get qualified unless you've done your, I think it's depending on where you go, between 60 and 80 days of observed teaching, but also you observing teaching.
Yeah, exactly. So, and actually, that is one of the things that we got to do as students of Alice. She brought in some of her young students and taught them in front of us, and that was just incredible. Like, to be at the beginning of your teaching career and to see your teacher teaching a 9-year-old how to
Mm.
play Organised or something. At that stage, we just all thought that was totally amazing. But we could see her in action, and that's pretty priceless. So I think, yeah, observe other people's lessons. And I wrote in the notes as well, not just teachers of your own instrument. I just adore, I'm kind of obsessed with the cello, and I love watching cello teachers in action because it's still a stringed instrument, but it's a much, in some ways, more natural posture than violin. And there's just so much that's transferable from cello to violin and violin to cello. So don't just be limited by only, observing a teacher of your own instrument. Um, attend masterclasses and professional development sessions on a regular basis. That's kind of self-explanatory. Join a professional body like Oster and Aboda, because again, those opportunities then are more available to you, and you get to connect with other people, other like-minded people, particularly if you're a studio teacher. Um, I would say be really organized and make a plan for each of your students. So I'm not sure what people generally do, but I suspect that quite a few people out there just giving lessons sort of week to week without
Yeah, it's
much.
very reactive. There's actually a lot of research on that already about
Yeah.
reactive studio teaching of where,
Yeah.
depending what the student did is how I will teach my next lesson. And
Yeah.
it's not good planning, it's not good teaching.
Yeah, it makes me really sad. And again, all the good teachers who I've been mentored by or who I really look up to plan.
Yeah.
So this is my really high tech planning system.
I love it already. It's color coded.
It's well, no, it's just a
Oh,
notebook that's just got every one of my students in it with a thing, and it's sort of like each term I'll sort of make a little list of things I want them to achieve by the end of the term. I might write, so the planning can be it's probably on a termly level, and then on an annual level, and then it's um a lot to do with repertoire. So I might think, oh, I really want that person to be playing such and such concerto by the end of
mm,
this year or something. And then I'll fill in all the gaps and scaffold up to that big
mm,
goal. But I think, well, not I think, I know that progress is so much faster when there's a plan. Like if you just teach week to week, I don't see that's not very motivating for the student. And these plans are often mutually agreed. So we say, how about we get you to play Preludium and Allegro by the end of this year or whatever. And that's just so motivating for the students. And again, it's about setting small goals and also big goals. But I find that by writing it down, it kind of holds you really accountable to it.
yes.
And then also in this really high tech book is I just record, like I'll just write, say, Kaiser or Fiorilla or Kreutzer or whatever, and I've just recorded what all my students have played. So I can see at a glance on 1 or 2 pages, oh, the student needs to finish these X studies or whatever. I can see all the keys of scales they've done. But then there's just a column of my kind of goals for them, like, oh, fix, bow hold, bow hold, bow hold, left hand action, whatever, vibrato. So I just am kind of keeping short-term goals on the boil, and then I can also see the long-term goals too. So I think planning is super important, and um, I think it might not be something that everyone does, but I think it's a really good thing to do. Then one of the 11 ways to improve your teaching is to stay musically inspired. So it goes without saying that we should all be attending concerts to get inspired, but also include non-classical concerts in that. Because I don't know about you, Karen, but sometimes when I go to classical concerts, I can't stop thinking about technique and what I would do differently, or I didn't like that interpretation or whatever. But if you go to a jazz concert, or if you go to a sitar concert or something, you're just listening to pure music without these layers of analysis. So I think,
yes,
yeah,
I've come back to that because I used to do that, but then most of my professional career has not been playing classical music or orchestral
right,
music, but indeed more, well, you would call it world music, but I'm having a big problem with that term at the moment. So music from around the world, Eastern European folk music and klezmer music, and then I could enjoy orchestra and chamber music really differently because I didn't need to be doing that anymore. So I found that very, very liberating.
right. So you're sort of having the opposite.
Yeah, I've
opposite.
come the opposite. That's
Yeah,
right. And
but
love it because now I
yeah.
work for the orchestra and I can listen to it without feeling guilty that I should have been doing that.
That's great. So I would add to this, of course, other than attending concerts, I've written play chamber music because it's fun and because you get
Mm,
to explore the greatest repertoire.
mm,
If people are teaching and they're not currently professional musicians, join a community orchestra, join a community choir, get to know the repertoire. That's going to make you so much better of a teacher if you've played a Tchaikovsky symphony, played a Beethoven symphony, got to know the broader repertoire. Um, and then practice. I think it's really important for teachers to practice, not just to stay in good shape, to sound good and look good for our students to model, but also to give us empathy for what our students are
mm.
going through. And, turning up every day and doing those thirds or doing those arpeggios or learning a new piece every, setting yourself a goal of learning a new piece every term or whatever, then we will feel the same feelings of frustration or malaise that they do. And it's just, we can help them on their journey more, I think, if we're also doing it.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, we might make a breakthrough in our practice that we can then go on to teach someone else. So I think if you have lived it, I mean, you don't have to have lived it to be able to teach it, but I think it's much more authentic and valuable if you are going through the same thing in some ways as your students.
Yeah, it puts you on the empathy plane with them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. One thing I'm really, really big on is teaching repertoire from the piano score and teaching concertos from the orchestral score, because I think that's definitely not done enough. And that really ties in with making sure that students have a lot of access to piano rehearsals. And again, that ties into accessibility, which is always a problem because all of this stuff costs money. But in my dreams, I would have a studio pianist and I could just call on them whenever I wanted.
That'd be wonderful. We all
But
just have our own on call.
yeah, but I think in my experience, certainly as an examiner and adjudicator, students don't have enough time rehearsing with piano, and that is where the magic happens. Because at any given time, if you're playing a violin piece or a cello piece or whatever, the solo part or the string instrument part is less than 50% of the music. And certainly in a concerto, if you're practicing away for months and not rehearsing a lot with piano, you're just missing out. So I think all teachers should try and give their students access to as much piano rehearsal as
Mm.
possible, and certainly be teaching from the score. Because I think in my experience again of seeing other students, people come to the score way too late in the learning, and it's really inefficient. And then it's really unmusical, it's really inefficient. And then when people do come to the piano rehearsal, it's so much harder than if they'd learnt it from the piano score to begin with. And then it just fits hand in glove because the student is aware of all the other parts in the music from the beginning.
Yeah, but it trains your ear to listen to where your note is in the chord, and all the intertwining parts, and when it's your turn and when it's not your turn. And it makes so much sense to teach music as a whole, doesn't it? I mean, so it's so obvious when you say it.
Yeah, it's so obvious, but I don't think it's necessarily done enough.
And we don't all have access, and I know that I was able to accompany my students to a point of maybe grade 3, and depending on the PC, grade 4. But after that, I didn't have the piano chops to do. I'd never accompanied them in the exams, but just in the lessons. But it did make a difference just to know what they were listening to and help with their
I
tone.
reckon if you could, again, one of the reasons why I sort of made this topic, it takes a village, is because in my village, I need amazing pianists, I need an amazing accompanist. And part of that could be connecting with students at the con, or even really good tertiary teenage students who it's not doing them a favor, but it's really in their own interest to learn the repertoire as well. And so,
Yeah, and for piano players to play in an ensemble, or at least play with other
yeah,
people in their training, it is good for them as well. So
yeah,
it's actually, again, it's a mutually beneficial
yeah.
exchange, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think that whole teaching from the score is a change I made in my own teaching from about 2006 or 7 or something. And that
Mm.
I just can't recommend that enough to all teachers.
Mm.
And then I wrote, pay close attention to the physical setup of each student. I know that's really obvious, but I think one of the things I've got in my mind when I'm teaching is the longevity of my students' playing careers. And I always joke to them, I want you to be playing the violin until you're 100. But I do, I really do.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, any good teacher of any instrument needs to really understand the physiology of playing the instrument and how effortless it can be, and how to have healthy movements and all of that sort of thing. So I think the more you can educate yourself about healthy body use, natural body use, the better for your
Amazing.
students. Yeah. And the last two suggestions I have are to connect your students with other experts in the profession. So I think, again, it comes back to it takes a village. I know what I want my students to be able to do, but I can't do it all myself. And I'm not an expert in everything.
Mm.
So let your students go and have a chamber music coaching with an amazing quartet player, or really always put them in touch with the best people in the profession for that skill. And I think actually COVID was one of those, like the lockdowns and things, were one of the weird benefits of those times was that people were in some ways more accessible to us, because you could just Zoom everybody. And I remember I was teaching this, or taking the string ensemble at my daughter's primary school, and we organized a conducting lesson with Carlo Antonioli, which was amazing because I thought, if I can, we couldn't get together and rehearse, everyone was in their own homes, but we had an online conducting lesson with Carlo, who was so generous to agree to it.
Gorgeous. We love him.
But the thing is, that was connecting music to movement, which is always a good idea. And then I felt that if the students had a conducting lesson and knew how to conduct, they might look at me a bit more as a conductor, because they were knowing how to read a beat, or knowing, coming at it from the other side. So I think it's really important to connect your students to other experts in the field. And I know a lot of people who are watching already do this, but just to know you can't do it all yourself. Don't gatekeep. Like, there are amazing music practitioners all throughout Australia, and also don't be too shy to ask people if they'd want to do something for your studio or for your school, because most of the time people would be always say yes. I mean,
Yeah.
people love to share. I know, sometimes we think, oh, I can't ask them because they're the concert master of so and so, but most of the time people are just thrilled to be able to share it.
That's why you're talking to me right now, because I asked you to come and share, and you
That's
have so generously.
right. I think the last thing is that I just wanted to mention is to seek out and create as many performing opportunities for your students as you can. And that was kind of part of my topic, and that's investigating whether your students can perform at school lunchtime concerts, in church if they go to church, at retirement villages, at, if there's a school that's having a local fete, is there a kind of open mic kind of situation where you can say to your students, oh, go and play duets for 10 minutes. I think it's really important to let students know that performances don't just belong in the concert hall, and that just live music belongs everywhere in our community, and to organize performances for your students which are non-threatening, non-competitive, non-judgmental, but kind of show them how much, or the value of sharing their talents with the community and sharing music with the community.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I've got 5 really quick questions for you, and you just go bang, bang, bang off the top of your head. Do you reckon you can do it?
Yeah.
What's your favorite piece of music today?
Oh, God.
I know, but just today. It's not
Today.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the Algar Cello Concerto, because I'm listening to my daughter practicing.
Oh, I love that. Do you have a favorite city, and is it Paris in the springtime?
Oh, I don't have a favorite city, but I think my favorite place is New Zealand.
Of course it would be. What's the least favorite part of the work that you do?
Having to deal with the negative side of competitions, and dealing with parents' sort of competitive aspirations which aren't in line with my vision.
Yeah, that makes sense. But the favorite part of the work you do?
Oh, I love my students. I love discovering how to teach to a wide range of personalities and range of learners, and just making music come alive for each different individual. But I also love the repertoire. I mean, we're blessed as violinists to have just this crazy, really infinite, incredible, inspiring repertoire.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I love when you talk about your students, you actually you light up, and it's a joy to see. I love it. Final question, and then we'll call it quits if you like. But if you could offer teachers one single piece of advice on their teaching, what would the impact be? What would it be, and what would the impact be?
My single piece of advice is kind of double-edged. Is set your standards really, really high. Because everyone wins if you do. So don't underestimate anyone. Never put a cap on what people could achieve, and yourself included. And then I would say just really commit to lifelong learning and broad reading, broad listening, talking to people, diverse kind of diet of musical influences. Keep becoming a better musician.
Amazing. Because what you've done now is you've made me want to, like, it's what, 8:30, 8:40, and I want to go and pick up my fiddle and play again, which I did like right now. So you've totally inspired me, and I'm usually too busy to practice person because I'm not teaching much string stuff at the moment, and so I don't prioritize it. But I speak to people like you, and then I just like wanted play, and so I really thank you for. And I'm sure that you've what you've said tonight has resonated with everybody that's going to be watching this, because being an expert teacher, which you are, is incredible, and we're so lucky to have you share that with us today. So thank you. Can you please all just like put lots of love for Caron in the chat and tell her how fabulous she is? Massive round of applause, which I will do on your behalf. Or this is my Auslan applause there. And thank you for your time and your insights and your generosity in sharing these teaching gems with us all. It's really, really special, and it's been an honor to chat with you tonight.
It's my pleasure, Caron. The feeling is mutual. I love chatting with you too.
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you. And then next term, we've got Evgeny's coming in to have a little chat. And I am aware, Stringies, that I've picked violinists for this whole year, and it wasn't by design. I just forgot. I just, yeah. So anyway, we've got next year some lined up with other instruments, but we have Evgeny Sorkin, and he's another amazing teacher.
Another student of Alice.
Is he?
Yeah.
I did not know that. There you go. That's no surprise. Well, it is a surprise, but also not. Cool. Thanks so much, everybody. It's been absolutely fun having you all on board and knowing that you're listening to the amazing Caron Chan. Caron, thanks again. And maybe you'll come back another time.
Yeah, and I hope to see you all soon in the flesh, I hope.
Yeah, lots of Sydney-siders today. It's nice having you on. Yeah, awesome. Okay, thanks, everybody, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Oh, good night. Good night.